Here we go. Right. So we took kind of a detour yesterday. We kind of put the web aside and just talked about JavaScript, right? But really, we're here to build websites. Let's not forget that's our goal, is to build a website. We can use all the tools we have inside of our tool belt of JavaScript to help make our websites dynamic, beautiful, functional, elegant, powerful, amazing, beautiful, whatever. But really, websites are what it's at. One thing about the web is the interconnection of sites and data, right? So one problem we've kind of encountered so far, that if we wanted to do something, we had to hard code the values ourselves, right? If I wanted to put a list of Disney villains on my page, I had to actually type in Hades, Ursula, and so forth. Right. If I want to go see what cars are for sale, I have to manually code that HTML. But luckily for us, we live in an interconnected world, and the internet is a vast place of data. But we need ways to make that data available and interchangeable inside of systems. That's where this topic of an API comes into play. So currently, anything we want to do, anything there's logic we have to do it ourselves. That's great, but we're not the first ones to do it. We can use this idea of an API, application programming interface, to actually use other people's code, logic, and data in a meaningful way. So what do I mean by that? A good example is weather, right?
Is what?
Weather.
Okay.
If I wanted to put a little weather widget on my site, I'd have to go, well, what's the weather outside right now? So I'd have to go someplace and manually code that, oh, the weather changes. Now I have to build some sort of weather station or wherever my server, wherever my user is, and so I can actually report the weather to them. Right? That seems crazy, right? There's already a system and network of weather stations out there. Why can't I plug into their weather system? Well, their weather system hopefully provides an API. That is a way for us to go to them, ask for data, and get data back. So now we're talking about systems exchanging data. It can go both ways. You can either ask for data to get data, and sometimes you can even give data to them to update data. For the first couple weeks, we're going to do a lot of pulling of data, but after a while, we're also going to start pushing data back to them. Dante, any questions?
So is an API kind of like a cell phone app? Or is the API inside the app in your cell phone?
The API is being used by your cell phone.
Okay.
So like if you were going to update Gas Buddy, that actually the gas price at this gas station is whatever, you are transacting across the API?
Yeah, I'm using the gas station's API. But what's actually happening there, Gas Buddy on your mobile phone, which if you're not familiar with it, it's an app that helps you find the lowest gas prices. Gas Buddy on your phone is talking to a web API somewhere. That web API has all the data. But really that web API is also interacting with the gas station's API to go get their gas station's data. So that web API is going, hey Exxon, hey Wawa, hey BP, what's your gas prices? Then it's taking that, doing some formatting of the data, and then passing that data back down to your Gas Buddy app. Cool. So that's actually 2 levels deep of an API, because they don't want to have to go out and manually do that data themselves.
Is it also similar to plugging in Google Maps to whatever you're doing?
It
So
is.
that you have
Yep.
access to it?
Yep. So if you go to a site that has like, oh, here's a picture of our map of where we are, that's them using the Google Maps API to display the map and stuff.
Does the military do that too?
What?
Does the military use APIs?
Oh yeah, the military uses a lot of APIs. Or they're trying to at least. That's a little different question.
I might be wrong to say this, but the reason I'm terrible at writing code is because I've relied on APIs up to this point.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the double-edged sword. That there's APIs for everything out there that do all the hard work for you.
Yeah, the reason I'm here, guys, is because I write scripts that talk between APIs. But when it comes to actually writing the code, I never learned that.
Because as we'll see today, a lot of what's dealing with API is, hey, make the call. When the call comes back, let's take the data, let's put it in the format that I want. For us today, it's going to be HTML. And then display it. and that's it. Stuff we were doing last week, right? Take our data, create some tags, and display it. Nothing too crazy, right?
So when I imported a Google font, was that using an API?
Technically, yeah.
Okay.
We're saying, give me your data, font data, and use it. So that action of giving and taking, of sending data back and forth, we're going to use something called an HTTP request. This is the type of request that your browser sends to a web server. This is us going, hey, API, get me that data. I use get for a very specific reason. Every HTTP request has a few basic parts. It has a verb, it has headers, and it has bodies. So the verb is the action. What am I doing? Today, the only verb we know is a get, G-E-T. That's pretty much, hey, give me the information. The headers of a request, that's the metadata. We typically don't have to do much of these, but typical use cases are, hey, what kind of content are we sending you? Like what type it is? How big is it? Where am I coming from? What's my address? But typically we don't do much with those headers, at least not yet. And the third part is the body. The body for the request of this message going out really isn't important to us today, because if we're sending stuff out, that means we're looking to update stuff. We're not worrying about updating today. Whenever we get to actually using an API to update, the new data that we want to add is going to go inside the body. So it's actually the meat and potatoes of the request.
So the header is like where you put like, oh, this is a JSON,
Yep.
or like returning JSON or something
Yep,
like that.
exactly.
So the body is pretty much only used if you have data that you're trying to share.
Mhm.
And then I guess if you're trying to get data that's done in like the header.
Or the actual request itself, the actual URL. So that's all fine and dandy. I can now ask for things like, hey, Liv, give me a list of your favorite cars. You know, stuff like that.
All the time.
Yeah, so she's going to give me stuff right back. Our agreed upon interchange right here is speech, right? I'm listening for sounds, and she's giving me sounds. In JavaScript and in the web, we use a different format. But we still need to have an agreed upon format. The agreed upon format that's kind of a more modern approach is something called JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Pretty much we said, hey, if these two systems are going to talk, if we use this curly bracket key value pair syntax, we can understand each other. So it doesn't matter whether it's C#, Ruby, JavaScript, Python, Rust, Elixir, Go, whatever. As long as we use this same format, we can talk.
It's pretty awesome.
It is. It is. Every modern programming language that should be used should have some sort of JSON capability. That's what makes it a modern language.
Is that like diverse programming languages?
Pretty much. It's the common interface. It's the, if we had a common alphabet throughout the entire world, that would be it.
That's awesome.
There's also other variations of stuff like XML or JSON-P or stuff like that. There's other stuff, but really JSON's where it's at.
I always thought JSON was something to do with JSON. That was just
That was what?
no.
That is JSON and JSON.
Oh,
It's a similar thing.
sorry.
So here's our first real look at a JSON object. Looks familiar, right?
Mhm.
A JavaScript object. Key value pairs. Things have data, things have values, can be anything.
So that's what JSON needs, it needs JavaScript.
Script object notation. What would part?
And that's an array that sits in the vehicle object, or
Yeah, that's just an array. There is a JSON specification. It's like a page long. I encourage you to read it. It's super abstract and you probably won't learn much, but it's fun to know. But really, this is it. I don't want to go, this is easy, but this should look familiar.
It's like
It's like,
objects.
yeah.
Yeah, it's objects. It's stuff we've been playing around with already. And once we get this as a response from an API, we can use this just like any other JavaScript object. So if I said, hey API, get me Luke Skywalker, I will get this back, and I'll get all these values, and if I want to go, hey, I want to display all of his vehicles. I'm going to map over the response.vehicles and actually be able to see the X-wing, snow speeder, and speeder.
Yeah, what I've done with it is I wrote a JavaScript, well, it was a React application that we could add website links to a page using JSON. So it would look at it would read the JSON, and we wrote the code, and then all I do to update it, just update the JSON, and the site was just there. No rebooting or anything.
Yeah.
So what if I sent a request and said, get me this information about Luke Skywalker, that was, has he spent the night in a Tauntaun?
Mhm.
That isn't an option.
Right.
So then what happens?
You get it an undefined.
Okay, alright.
You're accessing
It
a
doesn't like
property.
break, it just says, hey, there's nothing here for
Yeah.
that.
And that goes down to what language you're in. So more dynamic language like JavaScript, it's like, oh, sorry, here's undefined. I'll keep on going my merry way. If it's in a more stricter language like C# or Java or Go, it'll crash.
Okay. So how specific you are about the thing you're looking for matters depending on what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
How are we feeling? We use a request to go out to an API. We get stuff back. Once we get stuff back, we can use it.
How do you find the API? Where do you know where it is?
The internet.
So that's an IP or something?
It's a website that instead of returning HTML for us to see, it returns JSON for our programs to use.
Yeah, a lot of times they've got dictated by your requirements and
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
system you're working on.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
So is an API token then just like the thing that allows you to get into that API?
Yep. We'll actually be using an API for our homework that requires you to use a token.
So JSON is an API.
JSON's the data that you get back from an API. APIs produce JSON for me.
So your URL encoded extended equals true.
Pretty much.
Something like that.
So that's the high-level idea, right? We have systems that interact and pull from each other. Let's talk about the details. I need some tools in JavaScript so I can actually pull data from other stuff. We have something called fetch that does this for us. Fetch is the modern approach to doing it. There's other approaches that suck. This one's nice and straightforward-ish. What?
That's so fetch.
B, stop trying to make fetch happen. I love making that joke every single time. Anyways, fetch in JavaScript has something called promises. Promises is something that's really not related to fetch per se, but it's a core idea inside of fetch. Promises in JavaScript are saying, hey, I'm going to do something, and at some point, I'm going to get back to you. So where this is powerful is that I can have a long-running process that says, hey, I'm doing something, and once I'm done, then you can do this. So a long-running process is like going out to an API. An API is across the internet, it's across the network. As we've seen before, network speeds vary, right? Loading times vary. Whether I'm on a mobile device, on 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, stuff like that, things vary. So it's like, hey, I'm going to go out and get the data. I promise you, I swear, I pinky promise you, that whenever I get back, I'll have data for you. Then you can do your thing. So what does this look like in practice? Here's our first fetch. This is actual JavaScript here. It's saying, hey, fetch me that URL. Go to that URL, which is an API for Star Wars. And then you notice how we have a .then. That .then is from the promise library. That fetch is going, you know what? I promise you, whenever I'm done, I'll have data for you. Then we're telling you, hey, then, once you get back, then do this. You notice that then takes a function, right? It takes a function that has one parameter, resp, stands for response. And inside of that response is all the stuff we care about. So like the data and stuff like that. Liv?
Oh, so I see here that you just want to log the response, but you could manipulate that response.
I could.
Within
And actually, we are.
there.
So this is a fuller example. This is probably something more realistic to what we'll be writing today. We're saying, hey, fetch me number 6. I forget who that is. And then whenever we get back, check our status code. Make sure it equals 200. If it does, give me the JSON. And then, with the JSON, display it. So now this gets then we have added an extra layer really fast, right? So what's actually that response? That response is everything about the response. It's because just like a request has headers and a body, an HTTP response also has headers and a body. The headers is like stuff about that response. Is it JSON? How big is it? Was it successful? Do you need any sort of headers or stuff like that? Inside of that metadata, there's a status code, which is a 3-digit number. But we also have the body, which is what we care about.
So like, I'm asking you this question, sitting in this chair at this desk, you wouldn't think it's my question.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, all the metadata about that was her name is Amanda. She's sitting at the second desk in the second row. She's sitting in a wheelie chair. She has a Dell computer. She has her notebooks open. That's all metadata about that thing. She raised her hand. All that stuff. The actual core part of it, the actual content of the response, was the question. We could use all that stuff to like glean other information, but really we care about the question. And that's what's happening here. We're saying go to the response and give me the JSON. That JSON is also a long-running task. It's a long-running task because we're converting it from a JSON to a JavaScript object. I know that sounds like we're converting it from like apples to like sliced apples. But that process could take a long time if the JSON object is big.
Right.
So we don't know how long it's going to take. So that's a promise to parse it. I'm going to go and parse it and format it, and once I'm done, I'm going to give it back to you. And that's what this is right here. I saw a few hands going up cautiously, anxiously. Alan?
For the display error message, is that going to display it until the like promise is
Nope.
fulfilled, or is it just that's there in case it?
That's there in case it fails.
Okay.
You see our status is equal to 200. As HTTP status codes, 3-digit number. 200 means okay. If it's 20 something, if it starts with 200, it usually means that it's okay. There's also like 300s, there's 400s, 500s. Have you ever seen a 404 before?
Yeah.
404 is a status code for an HTTP response. 404 means the thing wasn't found. Does that answer your question?
So when I had to do a fetch and a promise for, I was doing some coding in the browser and I could not get my code to work in IE11, so I do a fetch and promise, and Angel was the one that showed me to do that, to get it to work in IE11. Is it because I had to, that the code that I had to use in IE11 already existed in the other browser, but I needed to pull that code manually, so I had to have a fetch to grab the code. I need that promise to wait till the code was fully loaded before,
And then you can use fetch.
because,
Yeah, that's an
okay.
example of a browser compatibility issue. Fetch doesn't exist in IE11.
Right.
It exists in Microsoft Edge, Safari,
Right.
Chrome, Firefox, Opera, all the other stuff, but not in IE11. Phil, you got a question too?
Is fetch acting as the promise here?
Yes, fetch
It is.
returns a promise.
Okay. Returns a promise.
Yes, which we're calling them. And then rest.json also returns a promise that we're calling .ven.
What that displays the data.
And that actually displays it, yep, however we want to display it. And in there, that's where we do like our create elements and stuff like that. Okay, just stretching.
But so really, we're asking it to promise 2 things.
Yeah, yep.
I mean, could that list be much longer?
Potentially, yeah. not so much with HTTP requests, but if we build more and more complex web apps, we can use this idea of a custom promise to like chain stuff happening in a sequential order. So like, hey, go to this API, grab me this data, parse it out. Now go to this API with this new data and chain that. So yeah, you could really chain a lot here.
Awesome.
One example is that I built for funsies. I built an app that used two different APIs. One was an event API, so like concerts and shows and stuff like that. And the other one was the weather API. The idea was, hey, where's the best weather for concerts this weekend? So it's like, give me the concerts happening this weekend, and then cross-reference that with the weather API. So I go to the event data, I promise to get data back, I promise to parse my data, then go to the weather API, I promise to get that back, I promise to parse that data, and then do my logic.
Then you promise it all together.
It's just been one big giant promise.
So is the logic inside the fetch then? Like if you had logic to do on this JSON data that you're getting back from this website?
Yep.
Would it be down here in display?
It'd be down
It would
here.
be in that, okay.
This is, so pretty much this is ceremony. This is pretty much what we're writing. Mm-hmm.
And when it displays that data, do we have full control of it?
Yep. 100% full control. That's where your custom logic will come into play.
This formatting is very similar to the for each and
Yeah, like that. The using a function to pass it around, like that idea is very common in JavaScript. It's a very powerful idea. There's reasons for that, which we'll get into Thursday, just a little bit. But like the idea of passing around a function is very powerful, just for this reason.
So like maybe in the future we might use dot then and then like filter our response or map our response.
So like what we can do, yes. So like in here, this is probably gonna be a list of objects, right?
Okay.
Give me all Star Wars characters from A New Hope. That's gonna be a list of characters, right? I now want to map over those and convert those JSON objects to a list item that I attach to my DOM.
Okay.
Oh, now I want to filter out everyone who lives on Tatooine versus everyone else. So now I'm going to take that list, use a filter, and then use a map.
Because map breaks it down.
Yes, or to whatever we want. Yes.
Oh.
But yeah, string. Yeah,
So could you use the map on the needle? Question.
potentially.
It would have been difficult.
It would have been different. We would have had to put a square peg in a round hole. Just like the reduce, it worked,
Yeah.
but it wasn't perfect. We could do the same thing there.
What did they do before this?
What?
What did they do before this?
They use either something called an XML HTTP request, which is crazy, or they use jQuery, which is why jQuery will get every single project you ever work on. That was built in the past 10 years, 15, 20 years. So yeah, fetch is much better. And even in 2 weeks, we'll get to a better option as well. And you look back and go, why did we ever do fetch? This is lame.
Stop trying to make fetch a thing.
It's going to be a thing, I swear. So, code time. Let's tell a joke. So here is a joke API. Here's an API that returns a joke. So we see that, what is the joke? So here's our first real dealing with an API request. We see that it has a URL, right? https://official joke API.appspot.com/random joke. That's that URL. That's what we put inside of our fetch layer. You see now we're also getting back JSON, right? This JSON body, that's what we actually want to use in JavaScript. So I want to write a small app that uses this API to tell me a joke. How's that sound?
So I just got your
Good so
joke.
far.
Cool. So let's do this. App.
Some of those simple jokes just don't make sense to me. So
Yeah.
I think it's because they're lack of humor level. I'm sorry.
What? That's a good joke.
It's a great joke.
Yeah.
Why was the tomato blushing?
Why?
Why was it blushing?
Because it saw the salad dressing.
I love jokes like that.
It's my favorite one. I'm surprised I got through it.
Sorry, notes.
We still have it.
Still haven't done it. Alright, so we have our joke, we have our code, and we have our website. Ta-da, hello world. So here, as with any good website, it always starts with a wireframe. I don't care how simple it is. Draw it out. Our site's gonna have one button that says, tell me a joke, tell joke. Alright? Whenever we click it, it's gonna go out to the API, come back with the question, or the setup, whatever that is. And then it's gonna have a button that says reveal, and then it'll give me the punchline. That sound good?
So you'll probably get the punchline in the first request, right? Or...
Because it's all in the JSON.
Yep. So as Phil and Amanda are kind of hinting towards, this one's going to make the API request. So this is going to go out to our API. And whenever we go out, we're going to get stuff back. And when we get stuff back, we're going to display the question. And then we're going to hide the punchline in like a variable or in the HTML. And then we're going to use this to manipulate the HTML to show it.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, right. All right, so let's do that. Button, get joke. Tell me a joke. And then we have probably an H1 for the joke. Gonna have a button, get punchline. Punchline was, you can rename that later.
Tab to make that go through.
Yep. And then the last one is an H1. Punchline. Is punchline one word or two words?
I think one.
Well, I think one.
We're going with one word. For the next 45 minutes, it's one word.
We can make a word. That's how words start.
All words are made up.
It's a requirement of language.
So I'm going to add some event listeners here. We're going to get rid of everything. So we're going to have document.query selector. We're going to start with the get joke. Yep. Get joke, add event listener, click. Get joke from API. How are we feeling with this?
So far, so good.
Right? Nothing too crazy. I'm going to console.log, getting joke from API, just so I know what's happening. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fetch, because I want to go there. Let's take this URL and plop it right inside of my fetch. Now you notice that I'm taking that URL, and that URL is a very special thing. It's a very unique address. It is meaningful, But at the end of the day, it's just a string.
And you don't have to do dot fetch.
Nope. It's just straight up fetch exists. It's going to give you a warning that says it doesn't exist. That's what it's giving me right now. But it does exist, trust me now.
Well, we're not done it yet, that's why it says that, right?
Yeah, it's because fetch is not defined because it's defined in the browser, not here.
Even the text editors like stop trying to make fetch happen.
Yeah. We'll do that later. So now I want to go, hey, whenever this thing runs, I want to actually use the data coming back. So I'm going to use a .then, pass it a function that has one thing called response. And console.log that out. So I'm saying, hey, joke API, give me a response, and I'm going to log it out to my console. I'm not going to parse the body, so I won't be able to see the joke. But I'll be able to see everything about the joke. That it came back successfully, how long did the request take, stuff like that.
So the response is the actual joke?
The response is the bucket that the joke is in.
Okay.
It's the response.
It'll just send back response.
It'll just send back like stuff. The joke is in there technically, we just can't access it yet. Amanda, then Hector.
So this is where you would get the status number from,
Yep.
it's gonna be the response.
Yep.
I was gonna ask, so that's the reason response. It's like a JSON file. What we're getting.
This thing?
Yeah.
Let's find out. So if I come over here to my joke API, inspect, console, that got blowed up. Don't care what's new. So tell me a joke. Getting joke from API, and stuff came back. You saw that it took a second, right? That's that request going out and doing stuff and coming back. Requests usually take time. That's why we're in a promise, because we don't know how long that time will actually last. So if I expand it, we see that it's just an object, right? These are the things we have. No headers, okay, status 200. URL, this is where it came from. So there's not too much here that's kind of uninteresting, it's a little bit boring. Interesting, but it's not exciting. It's not like, well, I don't have my funny bee joke here, like that's not a thing. Yes.
It takes an amount of time, is there a point after which you're like, cool, you promised, but it's been 9 years and I don't care anymore?
So there is such thing as a timeout error
Right.
that does occur after a certain amount of time that you can configure it. I do not know the default timeout, but it's like seconds.
Okay,
Um, with that knowledge, let's head over to a new tab inside of our DevTools. So we've done the console and the sources so far, right? And the elements. Now we're going to expand and use the network tab. Network tab lists out all the details of all the network requests that happen inside of our page. This includes loading the CSS, loading the JavaScript files themselves, loading the HTML files themselves, as well as any API calls that are going out. Those API calls are commonly called AJAX calls. AJAX calls. So AJAX, another acronym, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The whole point of API calls is to perform these AJAX kind of things. AJAX is a fancy word for saying I've loaded my page, but now I only want to update one little piece of it. That's it. So I've loaded my page, right? But I want to update it with a joke. And that's it. And I want to do that with JavaScript, not refreshing the whole page.
So these log images too, because technically we're using a URL
Yeah.
to retrieve them from
Yep.
our own files.
Yes. So if we go to, what site have we seen before? I don't want to load up another site. But if we go to, yeah. But if you go to like one of your old sites and go to the network tab and hit refresh,
There's like a whole list of stuff, right?
yeah.
Or if you
See,
were looking for
it's-
card images and trying to figure out where your file path went wrong,
This was really useful for that.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I should have done that earlier.
Yeah, so like see, here's all the requests I made on page load. I loaded the page, I loaded the CSS, the JavaScript, here's some stuff to make browser sync happen, and I loaded the fave icon, the little icon up here. So I've done everything. which is fine and dandy, but I usually don't care about all. We can filter it down. Like, hey, just give me the fetch requests. So whenever I tell a joke, here's my joke request.
Oh, we saw the joke.
We saw it. We didn't see it yet, but we will. So headers, preview, response, and timing. Headers, all the information about the request. What's my ins, what's my outs, what's the data about them. Is the man sitting in a chair? Is our laptop open? Is a notebook open? Did she raise her hand? Something like that. That all will go here. This is really cool for debugging because we can see, is our request behaving with the parameters that we expect it to behave in? But we care about the content, right? Preview and response is where the content is. Response is the raw content. Blah. Preview is, of course, a preview of the content. I usually just play in headers and preview.
That's so bad.
It's not. It's really great. It's not bad. It's really wonderful.
Take it away.
We'll leave this one up for a while. This one's saying, hey, you know what? Here's a preview of the data. Here's Chrome's best guess at rendering out the data in an appropriate format. So our objects are interactable. If it was HTML that we got back, it would actually render the HTML. So this is really good to kind of see what's going on.
So the whole thing that we're doing, that's defined as Ajax? I'm confused. Okay.
So preview is doing for us what we're about to do here in the next two steps. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we can see if it's working here, and if it's not, solve this now.
Yep. This is my hey, I added a button and I added an event handler, and I'm going to log out the very first thing to make sure everything's working and hooked up right. This is the equivalent of that.
Those parameters that are not parameters, but those properties there, those are all formatted from the API.
Correct.
From them.
Yep.
Like this is none of our.
Right. I didn't decide that a joke had an ID punchline setup and type. Whoever built the API site, the joke API said, you know what? A joke has an ID, punchline, setup, and type. That's it. That's awesome because I don't have to think about that. That's also a challenge because this structure may not be what I expect it to be. Or it may not be named properly. Properly is very subjective.
But you could always change that once you've got it, right?
Right.
Once you've got that information, you
Yeah.
can make it whatever you want.
So like we were using filter map and filter to filter through objects and arrays and stuff.
Yep.
So fetch is just a way, one way to get Ajax, I guess?
It's one way to get an array for us to do that stuff on.
Say that one more time?
Fetch is a way for us to get data for us to do the map filter and reduce on. It's a way for us to get that array to do the work.
Okay.
So we're not talking about the work part, we're just talking about the data part.
Oh, I was trying to make an analogy more so than
Okay.
if that makes sense. Because it's just containers inside containers. So it was map and filter are doing this on an array, and so fetch is doing this for Ajaxes. So no.
Nope. Ajax is just a high level idea of what everything's called. Ajax is on the same level as JSON or HTML. It's kind of a higher level idea. What we're doing right here is that we're making that happen.
Okay.
Is this an Ajax request?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
We haven't made that request though yet.
We have. That's what this button is doing. Every time I click this button, I'm making an Ajax request
That's what
using
the
fetch.
Okay.
So bloop, 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 bloop. Every time I click it, I'm making a new request.
New jokes.
And I'm getting a new joke every single time.
How do you know it's not repeating the same joke?
Let's
take a
another
run.
You know.
That one's better.
So
Oh my gosh.
Of course.
Oh,
I didn't get to I just said out loud.
Some of them need commas. Commas are dumb.
So
So what they,
It's
are
not
they
big
pulling,
commas.
I guess emphasis.
are they pulling this from another API or is it?
It's either some sort of data that they have. Someone either like said it and made a whole bunch of jokes. They might be pulling them in from like someplace, I don't know. But the power of an API, it doesn't matter. Like they could do anything they want to get their data. And here we have. So like the Gas Buddy, they can either use the APIs of all the gas stations if they exist, or they actually have people like crowdsourcing the information that are paid like minimum wage to go out and drive around and check gas stations.
So
And I was like, it doesn't data matter how the data gets there. It's just that they're in charge of doing the data and not me. Amanda and then Phil.
Can I ask for ID number 1 when I send out my API request?
Yes, depending if the API has that.
Okay. Depending if I know how that's gonna come through, right?
Correct.
So I have to know the formatting of the JSON I'm getting back?
You need to know you need to know how that API works. So here we're just getting a joke back, right?
Mhm.
And that's it. Do they have an API for joke /144? Nope,
No, okay.
they don't. That's because them as developers, whoever that is, decided not to have that.
Okay.
Whenever we get to building our own APIs in 4 weeks, we can make that choice ourselves.
Yes.
Not to put things in perspective. Yeah.
So your API can get data
Yep.
from other APIs
Yes.
that are pulling data. It doesn't have to be on the server. Like they could, so where you're getting the data, they're just pulling it from APIs.
Or
And you can just
potentially.
API to that?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
That's some APIs, yeah.
Okay.
It's poor, in poor taste.
Now is that,
If it's in poor taste and I'm saying it, it's probably.
Oh, jeez. Is it part of this API?
so does that make your AJAX requests different if the data is not on the website server?
Nope.
No?
Because really, I don't care where it is.
Right.
You're providing me an address of where to get the information.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
Whether you put that information yourself into a database, whether that information is stored in a flat file somewhere. Hell, if that database, if that request is asking a person to input a response, like that's still getting the data.
Right.
And the power of this is that my website doesn't care.
Right.
For all I know, this could be scraping a subreddit called Dad Jokes.
Right.
For all I know, and getting the
Right.
jokes that way. Does it matter?
No.
Can I give one of my weird
Yeah,
examples?
sure.
Because how we use it is that we have multiple systems that are different from each other, and they're grabbing data different ways. Some of them are searching. Some people are putting in data. We've created sites that have disparaging ways that information is obtained and presenting it, writing code that calls in all the different APIs,
Mhm.
and then we're showing it on the pages if it's just
Yeah.
a page with the data there.
Yep, that leads to a really good discussion about API first design. We talked about mobile first design, right? Designing for a small screen, refining our idea so it works on something this big and everything. Well, we can take that one step further and go, hey, let's not worry about designing for a screen, let's worry about the data that we want to show. What's the raw actions that we want to do? I want to have an API to list stuff. I want to have an API to search for stuff. I want an API to input stuff. Because once I create my APIs, then I can create tools on top of that, like Will was saying, where I can have this one app talk to like 5 different APIs and bring in all the data. So that's kind of like the next step in a more pure direction is like, what's my API first design?
Right, so where would you find all of these APIs? Is there like, can you just Google it? Or like,
Yeah, I hate saying just Google it, but it's like, what I want to do, API. It's like if I wanted a Google Maps API, Google Maps API. Typically, they live at like developers.site.com or like api.site.com or site.com/API or something like that. Sometimes there's official, sometimes there's unofficial APIs. Like Pandora. Pandora, the music streaming service, it doesn't have an API. But it's a web app that makes communications. That means that there's a server somewhere that we can talk to. somebody was smart enough and had enough time to go, hey, I'm going to reverse engineer Pandora and produce an unofficial API guide.
So that's why Pandora works with their Sonus.
No, that's probably an official app to Pandora. But like, if you want to like hook up Pandora to like show on your MySpace page, you know, then that's probably working with the unofficial API.
So can't that guy get in trouble for doing that?
Can he?
I don't know.
It's like me going to a building and seeing where all the doors are. Like, is that illegal? Maybe.
You took the door.
It depends on like how their intent and also how well the API is done. Like if I leave a book on a table somewhere that's unlocked, unstrapped, and you come by to that table and pick it up and read it, is that illegal? And what I'm trying to get is those are really hard ethical questions. That's up to you.
Right now, it's kind of like it depends on the data.
Yeah, and it also depends on like what you're trying to do.
Right.
You know.
So I know that we're talking about online, but like financial companies,
Mhm.
big firms,
Yes.
would they have their own individual APIs on their server that's strictly in a building, that's it?
Yeah, very, very possibly. And a lot of times to kind of help get around like the issues that we're kind of dancing around, they'll have an API that talks to other APIs. And that API that's kind of exposed is really good security and really knows what's going on. And that talks to their API in the background.
I will say 5 years ago, a lot of APIs were just that.
Oh yeah.
Now that's becoming more, it's changing, which is why you guys are in the right place.
Yeah.
Guys were just what?
We were writing and creating APIs that talk to systems that we designed within the company because we were integrating with commercial type applications. So there are times you're going to need to do that.
Yeah.
So it's cloud API?
Yeah. It's internet. It's anywhere on the internet. So
Okay.
whether that's a private intranet inside of your company or that's an internet on the whole, the cloud, a server in my closet, like as long as I can see it, it's available.
And one that's important is that it keeps you from having to write things so differently every time you're trying to connect. It's
Yeah.
a standard, so it really helps with creating something.
Like,
Sorry about that.
Internally, we're creating an API for student records and student data. Because we want to build our apps on top of this API design. So like an attendance app, a student homework app, a student progress report generator app, all built on top of an API about student data. So that's why APIs are so cool. Speaking of so cool, I want to do stuff with this now. So I have my response, but now I want to go through and actually want to get the data. Because seeing the response stuff in the console is only fun for, well, me. Yep, .then. But before I do the .then, I have to return response.json.
You look like a magician.
I need like glitter.
Excessively dramatic.
God, have fun with this. This is a fun one. Here we have a joke here. Now, what's happening is that we're saying, hey, URL/random joke, give me the data. Hey, I'm going to parse out the JSON of it. And then I'm going to log that JSON out to the console.
So now we'll be able to see what kind of tags it has
Yep.
and mess with them?
We'll be able to see what properties it has. And we'll actually be able to see it in the console what all we can do.
So .json's a function?
Yep, .json's a function that returns a promise.
Okay.
So here, now I go to my console, tell me a joke. Bam, bam, haha.
What?
That's a good one.
That is a good one. I like that one.
Damn it, I was just like, I was waiting for my moment to tell that one. I literally had it like,
You had it.
I was like, I need to remember, I want to make sure I have it, because I don't want to screw this up.
Yeah.
And I was, yes, I've got cashews all over my screen right now. So disappointed.
I'm sorry. But yeah, now we see the joke. We've ruined the joke for B, but we've seen the joke. Here, so now that we have the actual joke data, we can look at properties, and now we can actually put it inside of our HTML. So where do I want to put it? I want to put it, not there. I want to put it inside of the joke, the actual joke. I want to take the setup from the object and put it inside of my tag that has the class joke.
So,
Start with the document.
Yeah. So document dot query selector dot joke dot text content equals JSON dot setup.
And that setup is gone from that site and crash, right?
What?
If they delete that.
Yeah, if they would change their structure at all, if they would rename it from joke to question or from setup to, I don't know, something else, it would break our code.
Fun.
Yeah, right? Like, this is really powerful pulling in data from everywhere else. It feels good. But what it's doing is that it's bringing a dependency from their website.
Sounds very fragile.
It can be.
it can't be.
Yeah, like that's the trade-off. Now I have to trust that they're going to keep their structure and that their website's going to be available. Because now if they go down, now I'm down. Yeah.
Oh boy.
There's
Yeah.
ways around that though.
There-
In certain
Yeah, like there's a lot of strategies to mitigate that issue, but now that's something we have to think about. The alternative is now I have to maintain a big long list of jokes. So, it's sometimes it's easier to do yourself, sometimes it's not. If I want to do mapping stuff and I want to put an interactive map on my site, what's easier for me to actually do that and learn about projections and recruiter, like other stuff, a whole bunch of mapping stuff, or to say, hey, Google Maps, here's 5 lines of JavaScript. Like,
Right.
I think you could just write just amazing code and you don't have to worry about the small stuff. I mean, you can just write amazing user interfaces and interactions when you don't have to worry about how to get that data. All you do is call an API. It just frees you up to do so much better work.
Be a joke.
You gotta rely on somebody else's.
Who would
Well, that's
be the judgment?
Oh.
she is our joke master.
Yeah.
So it worked. But
He didn't get a raise. Oh.
Oh, did you put that on there?
I did not.
That's amazing.
So good.
Okay, random joke,
Do any of you know some pirate jokes?
Yeah. Pirate jokes? Like our.
Pirating?
What's a pirate's favorite letter?
Neither do I.
So what is a pirate's favorite letter?
R.
Our
He loves R, but really he loves the sea. That's the kicker for that. That's like a double punchline thing. Like
Yeah.
you can just say R, but everyone guesses R, so it's like, nobody loves the sea. So proud of that one. That was my cashew. So this is awesome, right? We can now display our joke. We can use data from someplace else to help display this. So now I can go, hey, tell me a joke. Aha. Now I need to do the punchline. That's different. So now, ideally, whenever I click this, I see the punchline.
But we didn't hook up that button yet.
We did not. So let's hook up that button to an event. Document.query selector dot get punchline.
Wait. Get joke from API. Where's that function? Oh, it's
That's
at
it.
the top.
Fetched it.
That's at the top. Just kidding.
It's in our JSON object.
No, it's not. But it's at the top. It's in line 1.
So how do we show the punchline?
Document.query selector dot punchline dot text content equals JSON dot whatever. I didn't see the
Does it exist
Wait.
outside that
Get-
function?
It's fine, right? Yeah. Because we already pushed the other button, which loads the.
Punchline.
Oh, is that
Does this
the
work?
data structure? I didn't see how the data.
I don't
was
know.
structured.
Because it's inside.
No.
I don't think so.
It doesn't exist outside that function, does it?
Right. So this is a case where JSON, the actual thing called JSON, I'm actually going to rename that real fast. Something a bit more meaningful.
Oh,
Joke.
Right.
Yeah, right? We can name that whatever we want. I typically do JSON because that's meaningful to me, but it may not be meaningful to y'all yet. So we have that joke doesn't exist. It's only defined inside of that bed. So, oh well, we're done. Sorry, we're done.
let's go
Liv,
with
you have-
CSS.
I just wanna make sure I'm on the same page, so we can't call the punchline because it doesn't exist until the joke's.
It doesn't exist until the joke's there, and it only exists up here right now.
Okay, so would this be like the setup before, like if, kind of red, I don't.
So could
So-
you pass joke as the argument?
I can't pass joke as an argument, but what I can do is that I can store it in a variable up top, like we did the deck.
Like you push it, yeah, that's what I was
You
gonna
do
Yeah.
a promise.
Yep.
I do a promise up top.
So not a promise, just a variable.
Just a variable?
Yep. Let current joke equals, we'll give it an empty object. And that's it. And then down here, when we get the data back, not only are we going to put it on the HTML, but we're also going to say, hey, current joke equals the joke. And then down here, current joke.punchline.
So that's your way of extracting.
Can you just say joke?
Yes.
The
Storing
joke.
it.
Because joke only exists up here.
Okay, good.
Yes.
So you go to.
So you just had to redefine it so that it understood
Mhm.
what it was getting each step of the way before it got it.
I needed to create a shared bucket for that both of these things could see. And that shared bucket is that variable there.
And it doesn't need to be a push because we're not pushing to an array, it's just an object.
Correct. It's just a value. That's it.
Could you do that again, because that's exactly what I'm having trouble
Yeah.
in my head.
So here, we don't need to do a push because a push is an array specific thing. We don't have arrays here, right? We just have objects.
Oh, well, yeah, but, oh, wait, okay, so is that why when we put our card arrays into an object, we took away that deck push function?
Say that question again.
So I put my deck arrays
Yep.
into an object, and then underneath my create deck function, I removed one of my deck dot push
Mhm.
because I didn't need it anymore.
Great.
Is that
Be-
why?
Yes, because your deck thing is no longer an object. Your object contains the arrays.
And I can just call my object
Yes.
or reference my.
Yes. Yes. There's some weird things around that, but I'd love to see you discuss that further. Dante had his hand up a while ago.
So we could just say then current joke equals joke, and then we could have we could take that argument outside of the fetch thing and do it just like the other one, right? Like just like the show punchline, we could have the show joke be outside of the initial fetch stuff.
Say that again with less pronouns.
Okay, so like we could say then current joke equals joke, and then we could take the document query selector and we could put it outside
This one?
in another fun. Yeah,
Yeah, we could separate that up.
if we
But
wanted.
it's all when do we want to get the joke? Do we want to get the joke when we click the button? Do we want to get the joke when the page is loaded? When we want to actually get the joke?
So if you booped that document queries like when the page was loaded, it would just give you the punchline first.
This? Yeah, it would. Like
That'd be fun.
if we do this up here, it would show everything first. If we have a mistype and do instead of joke.setup, joke.punchline, it would give us the punchline first.
That's great.
It's kind of like an anti-joke thing. Phil?
If you put the show punchline function within the get joke from API function, can you still call? It'll still read joke, right? The the script will still read joke?
The joke is still a thing here,
So if you put, let me say that again. If you put show punchline function
right here,
inside of the get joke from API,
like that.
be below the dot then brackets, right? So wouldn't that work? I know you're defining the function after, but if
Yeah.
you put the definition up there, you put the whole thing up there.
So this actually won't work.
Because get joke, there's one button that's doing both things.
So it's not even that.
Oh,
No, 'cause
really?
the buttons are
Yeah.
outside of the function.
So this is where the fetch comes into play. Remember what the very bottom thing of fetch is? Fetch says, I'm going to do a long running task and then get back to you. So what's going to happen, let's actually break this down. Let's actually have some fun here. All right? Amanda, I'm not going to forget about you.
That's fine.
So I'm going to comment out all my console.logs. All right? So I'm going to have console.log 1, console.log 2, console.log 3, and console.log 4.
It's never gonna make it to 4, is it?
So what we've done so far in JavaScript, it's all been kind of a top-down thing, right? Mostly. We've had some weird edge cases where we call stuff late or something like that, but it's mostly top-down, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at this with our current knowledge, it's going to go, hey, issue console.log 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So let's see if that's actually right. Because I'm sure you all know that it's not right. Like you see this coming.
The way you're explaining it.
So, okay, so it's gonna
Did I save it?
finish its function after
I need to actually call it.
the last stop then. Oh, what?
So 1, 4, 2, 3.
Cool.
So 4.
This is our first really look at what's called asynchronous.
I see why.
Yeah. So
That's what I know.
asynchronous is the idea that we can now do 2 things at one time. Multiple things at one time. And then sometimes any order. So what's happening here is that we're hitting the console.log 1, then we're firing off the request. While that request is working, I'm running the next line of JavaScript.
Yeah.
Our next line of JavaScript is console.log 4.
Oh, cool.
Then whenever we get back, we're running 2 and then 3. That's why whenever it started, you saw it logged 1, 4,
Pause, 2, 3.
and then 2, 3.
No.
There was hands up.
Okay, here's a question first.
Oh yeah.
So my question kind of headed towards it being asynchronous.
Yes.
If somebody hit the get joke button again while it's processing, does this break?
It sends off 2 requests.
So would you get the punchline for the second joke?
Whichever one got back last wins.
Okay, so you can't break it. Okay, that's my question.
So that should kind of make you aware of something called a race condition.
Mhm.
That even though we send off 2 requests at roughly the same time, there's no guarantee that they'll get back in the same order.
Order. It's whatever gets back first.
Whatever gets back last will win.
Okay.
Because that's what the user will see next. What else?
Did console.log 4 log before 2 and 3 because it actually took longer to get 2 and 3, or is it just because that was the order of operations?
So it's running this line,
Yeah,
then it's running this line,
okay.
and then it's not running this stuff
Until all the others.
until this gets back. So really,
Right.
it's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then at some undetermined amount of time later, it's running this stuff.
Now let's say like it was lightning fast, internets or whatever. Would it go 1, 2, 3, 4, or it's
If it
never
was
gonna-
blazing fast, yes.
Okay.
Which is where things get fun. Because if it's blazing fast on my dev machine, but when I deploy it, the requests typically do not take a long time. That's actually how I found a bug in one of my own code. Is that we had a race condition. When I was developing it locally, it worked. When I deployed it to production, I was testing it in my office, it worked. I was at a shotgun range and we were testing our app because we're nerds. And it wasn't working half the time because there was a race condition. Because now my network's slower on my phone in the middle of the woods than it is inside of an office.
Mm,
So you need to be conscious of like your structuring of what's going on.
interesting.
So show punchline. The reason it doesn't work is because show punchline runs before
Yeah.
you get the fetch back.
Yep.
Okay.
So could we use this to find the punchline first?
To find the punchline first.
I mean, to fetch the punchline. Like, instead of having to define it up at the top of an empty.
So we could if we could guarantee us that we're going to get back the same joke. Because if we try to fetch the punchline, then we're still going to get the. If we do a separate fetch, we're going to get back a different joke. So we'd have a punchline and a setup for different jokes.
Dumb question.
No dumb questions. We're exploring potential.
So, like I had before, if you had show punchline in the dot then joke function, is it?
It would work.
It would work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if we move it up, if we move this up here, it will work, but it will show us the punchline immediately.
Oh, but we didn't hit the button to show the punchline.
Nope. Yeah.
My dad has thought that joke was funny for a really long time, and it's just as funny now as it was when I'm saying it.
So like
So not.
this is still doing it, but it's going down.
Oh, that is the function that's in the click event.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hector.
So what Amanda was saying, that so
Uh-huh.
they click on the button, they fetch it, and then they click on it again.
Yep.
So
So-
does that mean they're gonna get a different joke? And is the time gonna take longer?
How does it know that we want programming jokes?
It's random. It's literally a random joke. So I'm going to click it really fast. Okay. Let's check out this. Yeah.
Rue has a waterfall over there.
Yeah. Right. That's the time. You actually see that we clicked it all. This one's relatively fast because it's just probably doing a quick select star or select one. So it's not doing anything too crazy. So we see that it came back in order, right? And we saw that after I stopped clicking, after a while, they all started to do their thing. So it's pretty much like a queue, first in, first out kind of thing, like you're waiting for a ride at Disney. We're going, hey, whatever happens first happens next. And we kind of work our way down the line.
Can we make that if they do see that it can't, the button won't work until the first joke comes?
So how would we do that? So whenever we click the button, document.query selector dot get joke dot disabled equals true, and then don't re-enable it until we get the joke back. So now tell me a joke. Now hold on. Tell me a joke. Disabled. Now it's done. So yes, using all the tricks we kind of already know.
I'm confused with the punchline a little bit still. Like, why, if we're fetching if we can see the properties for this object, why do I necessarily have to kind of do a jumping jacks to get the punchline?
So it's all about when you want the punchline to display. If you want it to display right as we get the joke, then no, we don't have to do all these sort of jumping jacks.
Well, I mean, I guess just why we can't reference it the way that we did the setup, I guess.
The way that we did the setup, like
It's a variable that only exists within the then, unless we move it out of there.
joke is a parameter that is we're creating on lines 14, right? It exists only inside of these squiggles, and that's it. It's what's called scoped locally.
The setup only exists
Yeah.
within there, so
Yes.
nothing else but the setup.
The setup and the punchline and the ID and everything else exists here and only right here.
So we can't call both at the same time.
Yeah, so as soon as we hit this line, it's gone. Unless we store it someplace in a variable top.
Thank you for explaining
That syntax just confused me a little bit because it's like dot map, it's got the open parentheses. So joke is a parameter, it's not a function.
Correct.
Okay.
that. Could you maybe write on the comments that on the slides so that when I go talking, I'm so sorry.
So what would you like me to comment?
Just under current joke, that last part where it's
Yeah.
storing this up top, storing
Yeah.
the punchline up top.
Storing the the punchline. So the punchline can be referenced
Yeah, we're storing
later.
the setup, aren't we?
What?
You're storing the whole object of the joke,
Mhm.
actually.
I'm sorry.
Oh, is that what's being stored in object?
Yep. How are we feeling?
How did we get the data? Was it in an array or was it just a giant
It's just an object.
object?
And if you wanted to, we have control of the split of it.
Yeah.
through our CSS.
Yeah. Like this is just now like any other object that we have inside of our code. And that's it.
Does it have the properties of what the old one had? Or
Yeah, it has ID, setup, punchline, and type,
You can console.log it, find out.
which we do right here. Amanda?
So if we were going out to like a weather API.
Yep.
And what we wanted to display was whether or not there will be lightning.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how they have their object set up, we can console log it, see how it's set up, and then just be like display if display lightning if true or something.
Which is probably common, because you probably don't always know how their objects are set up or what.
Yeah.
You need to see how they set up their
Yeah.
information.
Usually the first step whenever I'm finding a new API is going, hey, what data am I getting back? Because as you'll find out tonight, not all data is structured in a logical manner. And I say that means it doesn't make any logic to what you're doing. It makes logic to whoever built it.
Right.
You know, and in 4 or 5 weeks, you'll feel their pain of how you structure data because it's hard. How are you feeling?
It's amazing.
I like it.
I'm interested in what the tool we're going to learn is that replaces fetch, but I'll just take that for
Yeah. Yep.
later. Maybe give me a hint. What letter does it start with?
A.
He's gonna look it up.
It's gonna look it up.
Yeah.
Angular?
Nope. It's really. I'm not going to tell you how I would look it up, but there's a trick with that. So I'm not going to tell you it though. Yeah. Right. It starts with an A.
Look up every
Yeah.
API. Well, what is
What is it?
Oh, it's an Ajax. So let's look up all Ajaxes that start with A.
Or you can do like fetch versus A, and it'll pop right up.
Oh,
That's always a joke to get like, or the strategy to get like all alternatives. Type whatever you're typing and then versus
versus.
until like Google, and then it'll autocomplete with like the 10 most popular things.
Right.
Seals.
Yeah, versus is a huge buzz keyword lately.
Yeah, right. We're feeling good with API calls. We're doing stuff. Right?
Nice.
It's all very exciting.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much more we can do with this API, right?
So, like, I guess you don't know how many jokes there are, but let's say you wanted to, like, just, like, fetch all the jokes and then, like, put them on your...
Yeah. So like, what if I wanted to fetch a whole bunch of jokes instead of just one joke? This comes down to what the API has available for me. So here we have a use case. I want to get all the jokes from that API, right? I have to trust that developer thought of that use case or it gives me the tools to do that. So the joke API these are pretty much the 4 endpoints that we have. That's what they're called, endpoints. That's what each kind of thing is, each kind of URL is. It's an endpoint. So we've been using the random joke endpoint. Let's try the random 10 endpoint. / random 10. This is giving back an array of 10 random jokes. So we have an array of objects. Now, we can actually use the maps, the filters, the reduces to actually do some stuff with it.
Ooh.
I know, right?
So
How
we could filter out all the zombie jokes.
The zombie.
Yeah.
If you go back one page, the endpoints that it gave us.
Yep.
It implies that random underscore joke is different than joke slash random.
Yes, let's figure out why. It's the same thing, but at a different address. And
Why would that be?
so, same with this joke slash 10. That's the same thing, but a different address, right? So why would that be? Why would they give us two different things in two different formats? Any thoughts? What?
Different websites?
Maybe, but it's probably the same data source.
Different kind of AJAX requests.
Different Ajax requests, not quite. Will or Amanda will be.
They're opening options for how you're gonna use the jokes. Cause you
It's
could
still the same data.
right, but they're giving you a different option so you don't have to write that part into your code, right?
The address is just different. Instead of me going to 123 Fake Street, I'm going to Fake Street number 123.
Right.
B, you have an idea?
Browser?
Browser.
Browser compatibility, like will some of, you know.
So this is
all
something
browsers should be
called.
either of those.
Okay,
So-
so list types?
So this is how they design their API. The first two are one way to design your API, and the second two are a different way to design your API. You notice that the structure is different, right?
Mhm.
The two on the right, my right,
Mhm.
stage right, they're very actiony, right? Like, give me a random joke, give me random 10, right? The two on stage left, on your right, are a different one. Say, hey, give me a joke that is random. Give me a joke and give me 10. So it's more focused on the resource rather than the action. Okay? That idea of an API focused on a resource is called a RESTful API. RESTful API is a term we'll be hearing a lot. And that's pretty much, I want to design my endpoints, my URLs, to be focused around resources, not actions.
Representational stateless transfer.
Yep, representational. No, it's not that. It's yes, it is. It's
Stateless.
You know all this. How do you know all this when you don't understand simple jokes?
I'm interested in this stuff. I'm not
Exactly.
interested in.
Joe is for exactly
Oh,
the
state.
reason, like he's thinking through it way too much.
Yeah. Representational state transfer.
State. Okay, so it's not stateless.
They are stateless.
Oh, there.
We'll be kind of diving more into RESTful APIs later in life. But it's just a type of API design that's centered around resources, not so much actions.
Okay. I would like an example of when that difference makes a difference, because it does not here.
It doesn't here. But let's go to one of my favorite APIs, swappy.co. Nope, not .com. Swappy.co.
Swappy.
Swappy.co, the Star Wars API.
Ooh, fun.
So this is an API for all the Star Wars characters and planets and vehicles and.
Nice.
Old
That's fun,
expanded universe
actually.
or new expanded
God bless the people who made
This
this.
has
Does Mara Jade
He
exist?
just really loves Star Wars.
this has not been updated since 7. It looks like
So Mara Jade exists.
maybe. I don't know what it is, but we have the 7 films here. So here
That's awesome.
we're gonna do. Can I open this in a new URL? A new link. Swappy/API/people/1. So here's my URL. I'm going to swappy.co/API/people/1. I want to go get the very first person, whoever has an ID of 1. Luke. So that's Luke Skywalker.
Does it have his picture?
It does not have a picture. It has all the data about it. Because they chose not to have a picture. They didn't want to be an image hosted site, they chose to be an API site. If you want a picture of Luke, you have to provide your own picture. But they have all the details about it.
Right.
So you see how now our URLs, our endpoints, are more focused around things instead of actions.
When was he born?
19 BBY. That date makes no sense to me. I know it's relative to that universe, but that's, you have a question, Amanda. You're formulating your question.
I am. I'm trying to. I agree. This is a thing. This is a bucket of data,
Yes.
as opposed to an action. I'm just trying to imagine what an action would be.
So this, if we look right here, our verb is get.
Right. And it also, I see, allows for header options.
Yes, we're going to ignore this right now.
Right.
So get is the verb we're going to be concerning with ourselves today.
Right.
There are other verbs.
Yes.
So if
but
I
we're
wanted
not
to-
learning today.
Yes, so if I wanted to update person one, I use that exact same URL, but instead of a get, I use a put or a post. If I wanted to delete person one, I use a delete verb instead. So that idea of a verb plus URL that's pointed to a resource, that's really RESTful.
Okay.
You may not be able to wrap your head around it fully today, and that's okay, but that's kind of a preview of what's coming.
Alright.
Can you touch on the term stateless?
Stateless means that there is no state.
Meaning,
Meaning that everything that I want to do inside of a request lives inside of that. We're building up a state right now inside of our conversation, right?
Okay.
If I say we have a server, then I go, now it refers back to the server, right?
Okay.
Those are actually two separate requests. I'm saying, hey, Phil, we have a server.
Yeah.
You said, yeah. And then I go, yes, it is on the web. That contextual state of me sending you two requests and you knowing what it means from the last one, that state.
okay.
A stateless server does exactly the opposite. It's every time we communicate, we're giving each other all the data we need to communicate.
So I'm like sending the word, you're
Yes.
sending the word back.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's like, hey Phil, we have a server. And you're like, yes. And they go, okay, Phil, that server has this information, whatever that is. So that whole thing was stateless. You could plop out any single one of those and still do anything that we want to do. And it doesn't matter what came before it, and it won't matter what comes after it.
Okay. So like all the data you're working with locally, it's all state.
That's a state.
Okay.
So, for example, a version of a stateless call. If I want to update my bank account,
Okay.
I'm going to go, hey, bank server, I want to log in. That bank server is going to give me back a token or some sort of API key that's unique to me.
Okay.
In order for me to update my account, I'd have to pass it who I am, the account that I want to update,
Okay.
and also what's the new amount.
Okay.
A stateful server will be like, okay, whoever talked to me last, that's who's the account that I'm going to update.
Oh, okay.
So there's some power in that, but that doesn't scale well. Because if we're all banking with the same thing, we all try to bank around payday. Whoever's account we hit last is going to be updated. What if you and I are trying to update our account at the exact same time?
Right.
So now every request should be stateless. That's a nice little detour. Amanda.
Under get, when you hit the drop down box, it said get
Good at
the
that.
API.
I actually don't know.
Question mark. Or JSON API.
Oh my gosh, it's all in one.
Oh, right to the
So this is our first look at what a URL parameter is. So you see how we have the URL, right? /API /person /.
They just changed the format.
Question mark format equals will. That's a parameter. Just like our functions have parameters, we had like movies in here earlier. We can send values and stuff to a URL, and they will modify the request somehow or affect it somehow. It's like I want to get that person, but I want it in the format of a Wookiee,
That makes me supremely happy.
which is hilarious because that's hilarious.
So
Lives in the now.
So really, you could do this with any language?
What?
Could you do this with other languages, like anything you want?
Yeah.
I've done it in PowerShell.
Yeah. So like languages being like PowerShell, C#, Ruby, stuff like that, or even like English, Spanish, Italian. Like some APIs support a language equals English.
Yes.
Yes, where it's like that's what I would get. But again, that's all up to that API to support that. I mean, this probably won't support it, but
Doesn't support English, but it supports Wookiee.
yeah, right.
Well, that just indicates priorities.
It does.
And that's fine.
So yes, Alan.
I forgot my question.
I'm so sorry. What did you say?
No, you're
Why would it be useful to have APIs in the API? Isn't that just like roundabout way of doing something?
So this homeworld, let's kind of zoom in on this real fast. His homeworld, we know is Tatooine, right?
Mhm.
So we know if we go to Planet Slash one, it's going to be Tatooine. But do we need to know that for the code? It was up to their API designers to go, we're not going to give you the homeworld, we're going to give you the location of where you can get the homeworld data.
Okay. So that's helpful more for the developer.
Yes.
And not-
Because maybe we don't need the homeworld.
Right.
Why are we getting Luke? Is it for his homeworld? Is it for his films? For his species? Or his vehicles?
Because there's a separate API for that.
Right.
that
This
we
is
have.
kind of almost one of the pains of a RESTful API is that sometimes stuff like this happens. We're making lots of calls back and forth.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Is Luke
To a point.
human?
What? Yeah, he's a human.
So we wrote our thing, we send out a request to the API to get all the stuff about Luke.
Yes.
And then further down our page, we have a button that says display Luke's homeworld.
Mhm.
We send another API request to that URL.
Correct.
And then we have to display that however we want.
Yes.
Cool.
Want to do that real fast?
Yeah, because how does it, we don't have to write another fetch request, right? 'Cause
We
it's
would.
already gonna use the first fetch request to do that, right?
Nope. We'd have to use a
We can
second
get
fetch.
request.
So let's
Oh,
do
okay.
that real fast.
So that's kind of a pain in the butt.
Potentially.
Is there an
App,
easier
app.
way?
Star Wars. Star
So you could
Wars.
write this all in Wookiee if you wanted.
Star
If you
Wars.
Yeah.
know how to speak Wookiee.
But why?
Yeah.
No, I'm definitely but why, but like just the fact that it's an option available to me.
That is cool.
I may have done things in the past because they were an option available to me. I'm not saying I would do this, but I could, and that's nice.
So wait, BBY's Battle of Yavin? Is that right or no?
That sounds
That's
right.
a timing thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's marking things
Yeah,
by
so it's like-
events, historical events.
Which makes sense.
Just like we mark, the
Which is how time usually gets marked.
Christ.
Yeah.
Also known as the Battle
No,
of
like,
Is it big enough?
So doesn't Luke fly like a particular model of the X-Wing?
He's just an X-Wing. That's it.
Just an X-Wing?
Yeah.
It's the person driving the
It's
X-Wing.
the
Yeah.
indestructible
It's the
X-Wing.
pilot.
He has so much plot armor on. It's ridiculous.
He literally
Have you
has
ever-
a lot armor than some planets.
Yeah.
Did you ever play the Star Wars customizable card game?
Car game?
Yeah.
No.
I'll bring him in someday.
Is
It's
it
actually really cool. It's like, yeah,
it's like a board game?
it's a card game.
No, it's like Magic the
Physical
Gathering.
cards.
It's like Magic,
or
yeah,
like
with Star
online.
Wars.
Oh, okay.
And like it totally like went out of print and all that. But when I was a kid, I was trying to collect them. So like a few years ago, I'm like, I'm just gonna go on eBay and buy those cards I wanted to get as a kid. Really cheap. No, so that's cool.
Name. What else do we want to cover?
Complicated.
Name. What else do we have here? We have. All those are boring. Let's do the home world as well, and that's it. H1 class equals home world. And that's it. So what we're going to want to do here on page load, we're going to make a fetch out to get Luke, come back, then we're going to get a fetch out again to get his home world.
And so since they put the links in the object of Luke Skywalker, it might make it a little bit easier to get those links because we could just call it like that object dot homeworld or whatever.
Yep, that will go inside of our fetch. So our first fetch is we're going to here. No, let's keep that, and then then resp return resp.json. All right, and then this is going to be Luke console.log Luke, and we want to populate the name with Luke's name. So document.query selector .name .text content equals Luke dot name.
Neighbor character name or whatever they call it.
Name. And then after that, I want to do another fetch to Luke.homeworld,
Oh yeah, that's way easier.
and then resp return resp.json.
So that way you don't have to actually like copy and paste another big line or whatever.
Then this is going to be his homeworld, and then document dot query selector dot homeworld dot text content equals homeworld dot going out on a limb. Got to guess name. That might be wrong. I'm guessing.
So you have to put it inside a function called homeworld. You can't just put that one line as the parameter for then.
Can you say that question again?
You couldn't just put like then document query selector homeworld docs test content.
No, I had to create a parameter for it.
Okay.
Amanda?
Where you have fetch parentheses colon, parentheses look up homeworld, could you have dropped that whole URL in there instead? The one that was on Luke's page?
Yeah, but it's way better.
Say that again.
If
Where?
you go back to the API website, where it says homeworld, there's a URL.
Yep.
Could we have dropped that in there instead?
Yep. Could we have done this?
Instead of, yes, that.
Could we have done that?
That's my question.
Yes, but now it's not dynamic.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
What if Luke changes homeworld?
to,
Yeah.
you still
Is that
have
like with the joke? So like you can do 2 fetches because there's 2 APIs.
Yes. Because I know that I'm getting the homeworld of Luke. Unlike the joke, if I make a second call, I'm probably not going to get the same joke twice.
Oh, and that's right.
Why is it not dynamic if you put the extra URL in there?
It forces you to
It
rely on
changes.
that not changing
Yes.
on their end.
Because then if I go to, hey, give me person 4, which was going to be the big shebang.
Right.
Um,
And
And that's sorry, go ahead.
well, can I?
Yeah, go for it. I'm
So-
going to see if this works.
So when that's the one thing. That's the biggest thing as a developer. You write your code where it's dynamic. So if it does a call, it doesn't rely on the structure being exactly the same, because a lot of times you'll have it where they're adding data or they're restructuring the site. In some cases that it makes sense to redo it, but in a lot of cases you don't want small changes to break your code.
Right.
So anything we can do to kind of further that, like using the homeworld of whatever we get back, perfect.
What if I want a random person?
Well, we know how many people there are in Star Wars, and I don't know.
But we know the
Use
format of the
something.
API, right? I
We
just
do.
need to drop a random number into that place?
So let's. So what we can do.
/1, so you could just do randomized generator.
So this is also one cool thing about REST. We can drop the /1 and get all the people.
Okay.
Oh, and then then we get the file.
So
We
let's.
get our object array from there, and then we can.
So let's build this up. Our now requirement is to get a random person.
And show their homeworld.
Yes.
Just for your.
So I'm going to have to fetch to get all the people. HTTPS swappy.co/API/people.
Click
It would come.
Or you could randomly fetch a
Mostly
person.
not code instead of content.
Oh, okay. I was like, why is everyone yelling? It looks right, but that wasn't.
gas can.
Dot then resp return resp.json dot then people. So people in this case is now an array of all the people.
Right.
Actually, I lied. It's an object that has a count
Wouldn't-
and a next and a previous and a results.
So I'm just trying to think about this like the most efficient way.
Yeah.
Why not just put in your fetch URL a variable because you know it's / a number,
Yes.
and then you make that number change randomly, so you're fetching a random person rather than getting the whole array.
So you're not wrong,
Okay.
but what's the upper bound? Without looking, what's the highest number? Random number between
'cause, like,
1
it can break
and
easily.
100,
Right.
1 and 200, 1 and 50.
Right. You don't know.
You could do. Oh, actually no. You could do like the for loop for like the people dot length though, right? So it'd be like is for as long as there's people in the.
Well, I don't think you can do the dot length.
No, we just need to pick a random number now. So const random,
Array, that's for arrays.
It's true.
random. We'll name this to results. Random person number equals math dot ceiling, math dot random times results dot count. I got that count from the object here.
Right.
Ta-da. So now that'll give me a random number between 1 and whatever the longest one is. And then what I can do is plug that into here instead. Random.
I have to know that that's a variable. Oh, because you separate that.
Oh.
And then I can rename Luke
Wait.
to person.
Maybe random person.
This is gonna work.
Mm-hmm. Do we think it's going to work?
No.
Yes.
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 Yeah,
I
that
don't
is.
think so.
Wait, we went out with the fetch to the
Crash.
website.
Yep.
We pulled the results.
Yep.
We picked a random number of people out of the result count, so we won't have a number bound that's wrong.
Yep.
We're returning the JSON. In the JSON, we go into a person. In that person, we have a name, and then for that person, we have a home world, and we're fetching that. This should work.
Syntax.
Unless not all
What do you think?
people have homeworld.
I feel
Ooh, that's a good
like
point.
Mm,
I feel like there's a syntax problem here.
that's what I'm thinking.
But we're calling but everywhere
That's
else.
what I'm thinking too. That's
Mark makes
Because
a lot of typos.
What's redefining person?
boom.
Yes! Yeah,
Oh.
it works.
Why'd you guys
Okay, then
Normally when he says this shit is working,
there's always
something else that he's like, aha.
You see how fast he
All right, Liv, what's up?
person, I
Star
guess
Wars
I need
plays.
to know, person we're calling from the API.
That's arbitrary.
That's
Person.
Yeah, person we're getting. This was Luke. But now it's just a person.
And it doesn't matter because we're referencing that name, it is arbitrary.
Yeah.
If there's no home world, it's going to come back undefined, not broken.
So if there's no home world, let's just make it wrong for a second.
Okay.
No home world. So now we're trying to access something that's not defined. Our home world doesn't exist. All right. What do we think will happen? Liv?
It'll give you name, no home world.
It'll give me name but no home world. And what happens over here inside of our network tab, if we refresh the page, bam, bam,
Undefined.
we're going,
404.
yep,
Nice.
and it's going back to ourselves. It's going, oh, wait a minute, it's slash undefined because it doesn't exist. So it works, but fails.
It works.
Half works.
I love that one.
You're gonna see Ariel
Like,
do
I
this.
need to get good at doing that walkthrough where I check it back to myself.
Yeah, when I do that sometimes whenever I have something working, and I'm just like, I'm not sure how this is working. I'm gonna go in and break it some more. After I commit. Commit is working, then go in and break it. Like mess around with it. Fail.
Something I see frequently, I'm not sure if we can implement it here, is for a way to handle errors. Can we put a second parameter in our dot then that's like comma error, and then we use that parameter to handle the errors? Or
Yeah, so it comes down to, so not only do we have a dot then, we also have a dot catch. and that will fire if there's an exception or an error happening inside of any one of those nets.
Cool.
So you couldn't make it a parameter in dot then.
So dot then success dot catch failure.
Okay.
And that's always in the log.
So like if I switch this back, something that doesn't exist. Our error was caught. This is what that dot catch did. It caught the error, then console.logged it out to the console. That's not a good error, right? Yeah, right. That's saying that we didn't get JSON back, which we didn't, because we got an undefined back. We got HTML back.
But it still tells you the error location, like it gives you a line.
Yeah, at least gives you some hint to what's going on instead of it just not working. We'll leave that there.
And is that something we can use with everything else that we
Anytime that we have a promise. So anytime you see a then, you can use a catch.
the promise would be considered a truth?
A promise is just, I promise to give you data at some point.
Axios.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Don't try to use it today. The reason being is that you'll probably learn of some habits that'll be bad for next week. Whenever we hit react. Bam, bam, bam.
This.
So how are we feeling with this?
It's good. It's powerful.
It is.
Can't wait to see the homework.
That's a great segue.
Also that.
For tonight's homework, you'll be building me a simple web page that talks to a weather API that displays the information for a city or a zip code that's typed in.
Cool.
Yes. So as a user, I can type in 33716 and get whatever the weather is in. Or I can type in New York City and I get whatever weather is in New York City.
I'm a little worried.
33716?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine's 33702.
No, 33716. Yo.
That is
For
literally
life. No, it's like we're like 100 yards apart or something.
I know. That's what's so strange. Just like there's a very definite line.
Yeah.
They sorted it by us. I knew that was the zip code there,
Oh, yeah.
but that blows my mind.
So we have to find a weather API that is going to be able to interpret a zip code in the URL.
Or use the one that I give you.
And it's in the homework.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then it's really funny. Like this Batman gif like pointing at the map for some reason.
But our fetch request is probably going to have a variable in it, right?
So whenever you go to the site, openweathermap.org, you're going to actually have to create an account.
Oh.
I know.
It is. Stop now.
I feel like I abandoned every website that makes
Cool
you
with everything until that, huh? Yeah,
Oh.
really, this is the line.
honest.
Another spam
Yeah,
emails?
exactly.
I don't want spam
It's gonna be
emails.
like, there's
They
a
actually don't
definition.
send you anything.
Oh.
It's actually pretty cool.
Okay.
The only reason why you need to get that is because you need to get an API key.
Oh, they just sell it to 3 other people.
This API key is what you pass back and forth as a parameter on your API calls, so they know who's making the API calls.
So no Russia's not getting weather from.
Yeah. And they do that because that's their pricing model. Is as a free user, you get 60 calls per minute.
That's like a fair amount.
Yeah, that's a very fair amount. That's literally 1 per second. So as long as you don't put your fetch inside of a for loop, you're fine.
Wild.
Or don't try to fetch the entire library.
And continue to.
Yeah. For each city in the USA, get all the cards, get all the weather. Yeah, no. As you see, like more stuff, like this is really useful for like an enterprise app or something like that. But anyways, you also have using the API key. So how that API key works is if we head over to the API, this is our first real look at API documentation. This is the developers putting their pretty much how you use the API into words so we can use it. We want to use the current weather API because we want to get what the weather is currently. We want to get it by city name.
Is this all in the homework
This is.
direction?
Here's our API call. All right. So we can go to this URL.
Oh, country code. Is that a zip code?
And I could do
You're gonna use like only Madagascar or something.
New York City.
I don't know how this API works. So,
And without the API key, it's like, hey, wait a minute, you don't have an API key. So I'm going to head back here, copy this.
gives you the user key.
Yep. And where is my key?
So is that key? Is that what you call a URI?
Not necessarily. And app ID equals my key. City not found. That's lame. St. Petersburg. City not found. That's lame. London.
Find New York, it's not good.
Haha. There you go.
All right.
So yeah. So this is the current weather in London.
Coordinates.
So as you see, the data not necessarily in very straightforward format, right? Like the weather description, base stations.
Is the temperature in Kelvin?
The temperature's in Kelvin, I think.
What the heck?
That's awesome.
That's one challenge. Somewhere in the documentation, it tells you how to convert it to Fahrenheit.
Can we leave it Kelvin if we think Kelvin's badass?
I mean, I would like you to try to convert it for me.
Yeah, I don't know. What does that mean? Is it hot? Is it cold?
It's one way to find out.
Update it all the time.
Yeah. So if I refresh this and the weather changes, I'll get whatever the current weather is. So if it starts raining there, which it probably won't because it's clear sky right now, then yeah, that's fine. Sound good? As always, start with a wireframe, start with HTML, get some CSS rocking, and then work on the fetch.
You
Sounds
multiply
good.
it by 9 fits.
All right, homework will be assigned out by the end of lunch. No with me at 3 unless I get lots of questions, which I like questions. So full lab time this afternoon, but I'll be around.
You multiply by 9 fits.
We have
and
a
add
button
by
that
2.
says